Okay, it's one thing to be able to take damage in the game, but what good is that if the player can never die? In today's video, I'm going to show you how we're going to implement this player death state, which will include the game over screen here, which will allow us to load a save game or quit back to title. And so if you're struggling to figure out how you're going to implement that, then stay tuned. Hi, my name is Michael. Join me as we build an epic Metroidvania game in Godot 4 using GD script. This is the Metroidvania Forge. All right, so welcome back for those of you who have been following along. In our previous episode, we built the state to be able to take damage. And today we're going to implement this death state. And the state itself is actually really simple. It's probably just the smallest portion of this video, right? Because all it really needs to do is stop the player from moving and maybe queue up the game over screen and some simple things like that. But obviously along with that, there's some things we need to do. We do need to update our take damage state or the player. I'm going to do it in the take damage state. We're going to implement some checks, some conditions so that if the hit points are 0, then we know we need to then enter the death state. So I'll show you how we'll do that. We'll of course be building in some basic animations. So our player will have this death animation. Okay, and we'll utilize one of the sound effects that's available in the asset pack for the chapter as well to play along with that. And in addition, we'll build this game over screen. And this is going to be built as a part of our PlayerHud because it's such a simple UI. And I'm going to walk you through the process of setting this up. Spoiler alert, I run into a weird little bug that I didn't expect. And so there's a little bit of time debugging that. It felt like a long time, but I'm going to keep most of that in there so that you guys can see just the process I went through. I don't think that I teach a whole lot there, but at least you'll see that it's pretty normal to get confused with your own project sometimes. Okay, so hopefully you've been following along and you already have everything in place to be able to follow along with this tutorial. But even if you don't, I suggest that you do watch because you'll probably hopefully learn something new about how you might implement your own. But if you are really new and you get lost when we start tying into other systems that we've built, then I recommend that you go back and look at some of the related videos earlier on in this series. Otherwise, if you're ready to get going, then so am I. All right, so one quick note. Before we begin building this new death state, I want to point out one thing that I did. I updated my spike little dummy here so that it will do more damage to the player because previously it was doing 1 point of damage and the player had like 20 hit points. So I made it do 10. So it'll be 2 hits. And then obviously at this point, health is depleted. The player should, faint or die or whatever it is going to be in your game. All right. So with that, the only other thing that I need to mention is we should have brought in all of the assets that we need for this video. The death state animation was already built into that player sprite sheet. So if you want to use that one, you can. And any audio sound effects we're going to use should have been brought in with this audio set that we brought in earlier. Okay, but those assets can of course be found on the itch.io page, which is linked in the description. All right, so I think actually the first place I want to begin as we build this is let's go ahead and build the UI that we're going to display the little game over screen. And now there's a few approaches we could take for this. I mean, you could just build a new scene that you use and you load for the game over. And if you're going to have a complex game over screen, then that's probably recommended. But because I'm going to build a simple one with just a fade and, like a label and 2 buttons, I'm going to just build it into my player HUD, okay? So you can follow my method or you can do another one. The code that we're going to write that I'm going to use is going to be tied to the player HUD as well. So that kind of simplifies things. But again, if you've got a lot going on, you might not want all that extra stuff hiding behind the scenes in the player HUD. Alternatively, if you don't want to use the player HUD, but you do want to use this other scene, but you're trying to figure out how to do the scripts that we're going to write today, you could still use the player HUD to load this new game over screen. And that way the connection is going to be easier because we do have a player HUD that's a global, so it's easy to access from any script, right? That's I guess one reason why using the player HUD is a nice way to go, but certainly not necessary or required. But let's go ahead and just open the global, and I've got this player HUD folder. I'm going to open the scene, and right now this is all the player HUD has is our well, it's got a button that we've hidden that we used for testing. And in fact, we might even use this briefly just to test our game over screen. But all of this lives within this one control here. And all I'm going to do is I'm simply going to come here and I'm going to add a new control as a child of this control. It could be a sibling as well. Just add a control node here. And I'm going to give this a name and we'll call it game over. Okay. Now this control node is going to house that UI. So let's go ahead and set this to have this full rectangle sizing. And then I'm going to add a color rectangle. And what I'm going to use this color rectangle for, I also want it to be a full size there, is this will be a backdrop so that, you know, as we fade out, it'll kind of darken the game screen. It's something pretty common, right? Now you could make it black. I'm going to give mine a little bit of transparency so that you'll be able to still see the game behind it. These are just stylistic choices that you can make. I want to make sure that this game over screen is accessible as unique name, actually. That's a good, important step, or maybe not required, but useful. And then underneath this, we're going to have two other things, or three. We're going to have a label. So just a simple text label, and you could replace this with a fancy graphic if you want to develop something like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and just take this label and I'm going to center it for now, and then we'll update this. But let's just have it say game over. And because we've already configured a default font in my project, it's got a good looking font. Now you could change the size. I'm not gonna put a ton of work into how this looks because I mostly want to build something that's functional and that serves the basic purpose. And so I'm fine with the text sizing. The horizontal alignment of this text doesn't matter too much because we're centering it and it's just resizing the label, but you know, you could always adjust those things if you need to. I do want to give it a color, and I don't think I've saved any colors to my library that we could use. I'm going to go ahead and use the visibility modulate to color this. Alternatively, you could go into the theme overrides and do it that way. But I've got a deep red color that I use a lot in this game, and you can see here's the hex value, 7A0000. And that's going to give us this kind of blood red looking color here. And it just says game over, right? So we're going to have a game over screen. But what I want to do is when we show this, when the player dies, we're going to have a brief delay until the death animation kind of plays. And then we'll have this game over screen fade in. And then once the screen fades in, we'll present two options to the player. And those two options are going to be either to load your last save or to quit to the title. And you could obviously add different options if you want to. And what or maybe just automatically loads the last save game, right? But I'm going to go ahead and just add, for this, I want an HBox container so that we can kind of position those. What did I type? HBO, HBox container. And I'm going to center this as well, and we'll be moving it a little bit, but let's go ahead and add two buttons. I typed buttons, plural. Okay, button. And this first button we'll just call the load button, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and the next one will be the, what was it, quit? Quit button. Okay, we've got two buttons. Let's give it some text. We'll say load last save, maybe, and then in the quit button, we'll say quit to title. If I could type. There we go. One thing I want to do is I want these to look very uniform, so I'm going to select both of them. Probably could have done this first, but let's go into layout and give them a custom minimum size of 150 pixels. So they're going to both be 150 pixels wide. The text is asymmetrical, but I do like the buttons being symmetrically centered. And I'm going to take this HBox container and I'm going to resize it a little bit smaller. And you'll see it's going to, you know, these buttons are going to squish and grow with it. I don't want it to be too small, but I don't want them super big and chunky either. So I'm going to just eyeball it, and then I'm going to just drag this down so that it's beneath the game over text. And I'm going to keep the game over. Maybe I'll bump it up a little bit, but I want it more or less centered. Okay. So there we go. So that is the final state of our game over screen. In order to make these buttons easy to access, let's go ahead and turn on the access as unique name for those as well. And there we have it. One thing that we can do is I'm going to take this test button that I've got, I'm going to hide my game over screen. But this test particles, part styles button, I'm going to just call this like test game over so that we can use it to just show this game over screen and test the little animation and things like that that we'll add to it. All right. Okay, so if I run this, I shouldn't see the game over screen, but I should see my test, which right now tests the particles, because that's how I last used this button. Okay, so there we go. So far, so good. Okay, I believe at this point we're in a good spot to come in here to our PlayerHud script. So since this is a global, these functions and these methods are globally accessible from any other script, which will make it really easy to be able to call and, display this game over HUD if we build in a nice little function for it. Before we do that though, let's go ahead here and in the beginning of our PlayerHud script, let's bring in a few more on-ready variables that we're going to need. So right now we're using this HP, whatever, this margin container and the bar just for our health, but we need some things for the game over screen. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to be able to manipulate the game over control node itself. So I'm going to grab that. And then we want access to the buttons so that we can set those up and make them function as needed. And that's all I'm going to control on this screen is just these three items. Okay, so we're going to fade the screen in, and then we will make the buttons visible and hook them up as well as needed. Okay. In our ready function, let's go ahead and do this. Let's set up so that by default, like if we accidentally left our game over screen visible, we don't want that to be the state in the game. So I'm going to come into the script and I'll leave that visible, and we'll just add a quick line here, and we'll just tell our game over screen to not be visible. All right. This way it's pretty fail safe. We shouldn't ever be displaying it when we start. And I'm also going to go ahead and connect to the pressed state for the load and the quit buttons here. Because we will be, when they're hidden, they're not going to be clickable or pressable, right? There's no way that we can interact with them. So I think it's okay to just do this one time. Again, if you have a complex screen, then this all might be somewhere else and probably only connected when you load the game over screen. But here we go. Load button, .pressed, .connect. And of course, we'll just need some new functions for this button and for the other one. So this one will be on load pressed. And I'm going to go ahead and copy. Well, here, let's create the onload pressed function. Actually, let's do that down here. Okay. And then going back up to the ready function, we have our, let's see, quit button dot pressed. And we'll call it on quit pressed. Okay. Pretty straightforward stuff so far. And actually, you're going to find that this is pretty straightforward stuff. So I'm not going to be teaching many new concepts, I don't think, today, but this is just going to be a walkthrough of how I want to implement this. And hopefully it gives you ideas on how you might implement your own. And obviously, there's a lot of room for experimentation in something like this because UIs can do all sorts of stuff. You can bring in and add animations if you want to. Really, what we need to do on these on load and on quit are pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and write the functionality for these. When we load it, we're just going to load our last save game. And let's go ahead and just type in save manager here. And I want to just go over to the save manager because it's been a while since we worked on this. But we've got a few things in here. One is that we'll have a current slot. And anytime you begin playing the game, you should have that slot set. So by default, it's on 0, which is save 1. Okay. We also have a load game function, which we need to pass in the slot that we want to load, and then it'll just load it. And so because we have a current slot and that function, we can just kind of call the load game and just tell it to load whatever the current slot is. And that's going to load the game and it'll just work pretty easy. So that's what we'll do. We'll just call save manager.load game. And then for the slot, we can type in save manager.current slot. All right. And there we go. That's going to go ahead and do it. Now, the other thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need a way to kind of clear the game over screen. And we'll get there because we haven't even shown it yet, right? But we're going to need that. And then the same kind of thing is going to happen on quit, right? But instead of loading a game, though, on quit, we're just going to load a scene. We're going to load the title screen. So we can just say, in this case, we'll use the scene manager instead of the save manager. So we're going to say scene manager, and we'll transition. We'll use our transition scene function. Now here, we need a reference to our title screen. So if I just come down to title screen and drag that scene in, boink. And then we just need to populate a few other things, right? Like it asks for a target area, which we aren't going to have an area for our player to spawn at because we're not actually moving through the levels. So I'm just going to leave that blank. And same with this player offset. I'm going to leave that blank. I'll just set it, well, not blank, but set it to a vector 2.0. And then finally, we need a transition direction. And I tend to default to up. So much so that I wonder if I should have already built that in as a default. But there we go. So we can call this transition scene. And whatever function we build to clear the game over screen, we'll want to also call from the on quit pressed. Okay. So when we load, we'll load our game. And when we quit, we'll quit to the title screen. Before we can test this, though, we need a way to actually display the game over screen. And so we'll build that function next. Okay, so let's go ahead and build functions for these. So right here before our on load and on quit pressed, let's build in the functions that we're going to need for our game over screen. So the first one will be to show game over. And yeah, I think just show game over is fine. And we don't need any arguments there. There we go. And then like we've kind of hinted here, we need a clear or a hide game over screen. Yeah, let's call it clear. We'll say func clear game over. How about that? Okay, so now we can go ahead and take this clear game over function, and even though it doesn't do anything yet, let's go ahead and plug it in where we've made these comments so that these two functions are now complete, and we'll just build that functionality in right there. Okay, so let's start though by fleshing out the show game over. What is it going to do? You're probably wondering about animation, and because this is a simple version, I'm going to just use a tween to tween and animate that game over, this game over node here. Okay, so we don't need an animation player. If you want to use an animation player, then that would be pretty simple and straightforward as well. Instead of what we'll do is we'll start a tween and wait for it to finish. If you were going to use an animation, you would just play the animation and then you could wait for the animation to finish. A couple things that we'll do. I want to make sure that our load button and our quit button are actually hidden at first. So I'm going to set the visibility of these to false. And we could obviously set the visibility of these elsewhere, but if we do, then we just have to be careful because we could run into a situation where if you make them visible false in the ready function, then if you die twice, then so the second time they're not going to be hidden or something weird, right? So I think this is just a safe way to do it to make sure that they are hidden. And then I also want to do the following, because we're going to animate this game over screen, we need to kind of set it to an initial state where it's invisible, even though we're going to make it visible. And so we'll use the modulate value. So essentially we'll come in here and we'll just programmatically set the alpha to 0, right? And then we'll fade the alpha in to 255 or to 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll say game over dot modulate. And then we can actually pass in dot A and just set the value of just the alpha. So we'll just set that to 0. And now that this is hidden, we can actually make it visible. So we'll say game over dot visible equals true. And we won't actually be able to see it, right? But then we can, this is where we can fade it in. So we'll just make a very simple tween. And all we're going to do is just tween one property. So we'll say tween.tween property. And we want to tween the game over node. We want to tween its modulate property, right? There we go. And then we're going to tween it to, I'm just going to use color.white. That's a pretty simple way to get a fully opaque white color. And then we just need a duration. I'm going to make it kind of slow, but not too slow, 3 seconds. And then here we'll just await this tween's finished signal, okay, which is going to convert this little function into an asynchronous function. So it'll run, start a tween, and then it's going to wait until this is done, which is going to take 3 seconds. And then once it's done is when I want to display the quit and the load visible button. So I'm going to say, let's see, we'll just do load button dot visible equals true. And we'll do the same with the quit button visible equals true. And the last thing that we need to do is we need to grab focus of one of the buttons. And we're going to grab focus of the load button because it's the one on the left. So that makes sense. Obviously, if you want it to be a different button, then just change the code. So we'll say load button.grab focus. And there we go. Okay, that is the complete show game over function. A little bit of code, but it's all really simple stuff and really straightforward. And so I think what I'd like to do at this point before we finish the clear game over is let's real quick, let's go ahead and hook up our, did we put a script on our button here? Yeah, we did. Boink. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to just clear this out, or maybe I'm going to comment it out in case I want it later. I'm just going to come in here and you know what we can do? We can just say PlayerHud dot, and then we can say show game over. Okay. So now when we click this button, we should be able to see what that game over screen looks like. There it goes. It's just going to fade in over 3 seconds and then select our buttons. We do have an issue. The player is still active in the background. We don't want that. And obviously this test game over button is selectable, but these buttons work. And whoa, I just clicked both of them. But cool. I think that's working pretty good so far. Okay. Now let's go ahead. We may have to do something about being able to press both. I'm not sure what we need to do there, but we haven't built that clear game over screen yet. So really the problem should be fixed when we do that. So we'll go back to our PlayerHud script and let's work on this clear game over. So what we'll do with clear game over is, I think this is actually not something I did before, but let's go ahead and just set these to false again. And what we really need to do here is we need to wait for our new scene to be loaded and then, or to start loading, because we've got a transition, right? So we've got a quick black fade. And then at that point, once the current scene fades out, we can hide the game over screen. And then the fade will fade back in with whatever it loaded, whether that's the save game scene that we loaded or the title screen. Okay, so we'll say, let's do a wait. And we have a signal on our scene manager that we can use for this. So we'll just go to our scene manager dot load scene started. Load scene started is fired once it's faded out. Okay. And then here, what we can do is, so once it's started, then we can go to our game over dot visible. Yeah, there it is, visible. And we'll just say equals false. The other thing that we're going to do that's actually kind of important, we've got a player, we've got an instance of our player. Before we load our new scene, we kind of want to clear that player, because otherwise it's going to be, he's going to inherit everything that he's got from his state when he died. So that could be problematic for a couple reasons. And it kind of depends on your game design. But let's say you don't want levels gained to be persistent if you die. They need to be able to go back and save it. But here, what might happen is you gain 2 levels and then you die, and then you load the game. And because it has let's say you're at level 10, because you have a player there, he's level 10, it's just going to maybe instantiate him. And then we'd have to build in code to make sure we heal him because he was in the dead state and all this weird stuff. Really, I think a simpler approach that avoids a lot of those issues is just to get rid of our player. And then, because we've got systems built into our game that will instantiate a new player when it's appropriate, like when we load a level, then we can just let those systems handle creating the player, or creating a new player, I should say. So let's go ahead and just grab reference to our player, right? We know it's a player, and we can just use the handy dandy get tree and then just get the first node in group. And I'm going to be a little bit honest here. This is a pattern I've followed a lot, where I do this within nodes that need access to the player. In almost all projects I've built previously, I have a player manager global script that will keep access to the player whenever he's been instantiated. And that's a little bit easier or a tiny bit less code, but whatever. I'm not too worried about it, but you may want to build something like that. But now that we have him, though, we can just say player.queueFree. And in fact, it's not even necessary to strongly type him as a player, because any node or node2d has a queueFree function. But in case you need to do anything else here, you could, right? But there we go. So we're going to go ahead, and once our load scene starts, we will hide the game over screen and we'll get rid of the player. And then the scene is going to load. The scene manager or the save manager are both going to be able to just take care of their work and instantiate a new player when needed. All right, so let's go ahead and test this again. So now when I say test game over, we still haven't implemented a death state, but now if I say load save game, the buttons go away. Uh-oh. Looks like we didn't hide the game over screen, did we? Did we not write something in there? We've got this game over dot visible equals false. And then we've got our queue freeing our player. Okay, what did I do? Load scene started. I think that's correct. Let's test this. Did we not hit this? Game over. I didn't. Let's check. Did I get this name wrong? Let's go look at our scene manager. What signals? Load scene started, which should be right here. Okay, let's go back to our player HUD. Are we not calling the clear game over screen at all? I thought we did because those buttons disappeared. I'm going to keep 2 tests in here. Test. We're not getting here. What did I do wrong? You know what? I think I have a bug because I have a difference between how I built my save or my scene manager in my dev project and how I built it here in my production or whatever recording version of this project. And I think it's right here. Yeah. I'm emitting this right away. So unfortunately, I think this load scene started signal is getting emitted before we call the game over. So we're never actually picking it up. So I think there's 2 ways we could handle this. One is we could move this to be below the await. But actually, I think that's appropriate, but I'm not 100% sure. The other thing that we could do is when we have scene entered, we have this signal as well. So maybe what I'll do is let's just try the scene entered. If I could spell it right. And this should work. I don't think it's going to cause any issues. So let's just try this because the scene entered, you can see this happens after the await. So there's going to be a period for the fade. And then it does some other stuff here, but it's essentially going to happen on that first tick after the fade ends. So let's try this one more time. And if it doesn't work, then I'm quitting. I'm done. Let's do load save game. Yeah, there we go. Okay, that hit it. And if we check, we've got test and test 2. Okay, that seems to be working fine. Let's test this one more time and quit to the title screen and make sure it's still working. Yeah. I hope we didn't see anything weird. Did we see anything weird? Let me just load a game and test it again. This is sometimes important with testing. Make sure that we get the timing right so that we don't have pop in and pop out. Load last save. Yeah, I think that works pretty good. Okay, good. We resolved that. So I'm going to go ahead and close scene manager, save manager, this little extra script here. Okay, so I can remove these prints to test because we've got it working. And there we go. So we've got a clear game over function. We have a show game over function. Now that we've tested it, I can go ahead and we can take this little debug button and hide it. And we should be ready now to just work on the actual death state. So that was a little bit of some, important but long extra work to get this set up so it's working, but hopefully you managed to follow along through my little confusions. Depending on how your scene manager is built, just note that that signal, we need there to be some time passed for that signal to be effective. Otherwise, we could potentially build in just a timer and just say like await for a certain amount of seconds and set a timer. So, if you run into issues with this PlayerHud script where you don't have a good way to await, you could just change this to a getTree.create timer for however many seconds you need, or even just do it right away and just hide it right away. If you hide it without an await for a fade out or something, then it's going to be kind of abrupt feeling, right? So that's why I've built that in there. But now you know how that works. So technically this isn't required. It just helps it look nicer. Okay, let's get this show on the road. I'm going to go ahead and hide my damage areas and this attack sprite swoosh. What we need to build before we build our player death state real quick is just a simple animation. Oh, look, the swoosh on the reset is showing. We can change that. Visible. Off. That's why it keeps popping up every time I do this. Reset. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's go here and I'm just going to pick idle. I'm going to duplicate the animation and I'll call it death. You could give it any kind of name you want. I'm going to set my frame duration to just a 0.1 seconds, I think. And then this animation is going to need to be a little bit longer. I'm going to set it to 1.4 seconds. And the first frame should be 47 on that sprite sheet. Okay, so he's going to look just like the stun state. Gosh dang it, I don't know why this keeps coming back. Someday I'll get that fixed, but I'm going to go ahead and just set this to 47, and then I'll select the sprite and just come to frame here, and I'm just going to click. There we go. So that last frame, I actually was thinking I was going to end on 1.3. I'm not sure if I did something different, but there we go. Oh, there is still a little bit left on there, isn't there? So maybe there is one more frame. Let's go ahead and click, and this should actually be 60. There we go. Okay, so there we go. 60 up from 47 to 60. And so we've got a simple animation where the player's going to go. Kind of a cheap death animation, but a little bit fun. Okay, so make sure you get that set up because we're going to need that when we implement our state. Okay, now that we've got that, let's go ahead and add a node to our states here for our new state machine. And we'll give it a name, call mine death. And we need to make a new script for that. So I'm going to come here to my states and I'll add a, oops, I'm going to right click and say create new script. And we'll add a new death state. And I'm going to open the idle state. I like to do, or maybe let's do the, yeah, whatever. I'll do the idle state. I like to just copy one of these and paste it. That speeds it up a little bit, although we now have to go through and rename. And let's see, player state death should be good. And I'm going to just, well, we can keep the animation play. Let's just clear out most of these little functions, and then we can update them as needed. But there's not going to be a whole lot happening in this state, right? Okay, there we go. In fact, I'm going to set this to null. Okay. Now, once we've got this death state set up, we just need to do a couple things. One thing is we want a reference to the sound effect that we're going to play when the player dies. So we've got a WAV file that's in the general audio that we brought in, and it's called death. So I'm just going to bring this in here. So we've got a reference to that. And I like to give the name some indicator that it's an audio stream of some sort. Okay, so when we don't need an init function, so we can just clear that one out. But when we enter this state, obviously we're going to play this new animation that we just built. We can play this sound effect that we just brought in. So we'll use our audio play spatial sound, and we're going to pass in this death audio as well as our player's global position, like so. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm also going to fade out the music. So I'm going to say audio.play music. And then here, because of the way we built that play music system, we can just set it to null. So that'll transition to no music. And then, of course, the last thing we need to do is we need to display our game over screen. But before we do that, let's go ahead and wait for our death animation to play. So I'm going to say player.animation player. And then we've got an animation finished signal that we can wait for, okay? And then at that point, we'll call PlayerHud dot, and then what is it? Show game over, just like that. So we should have a little, process that's going to just get us there. There's maybe a tiny bit more that we can do to this state. So let's go ahead and implement it, because the only other thing I can think of that we need to do is to set our player's velocity to 0. I don't know about the Y. I guess the Y velocity could change, but I'm just going to set the X because that's the one that matters. So I'm going to just set the X velocity to 0. So there's no more movement. Okay. The catch is we can't yet enter this death state. So the next thing we need to do is hook that up. Okay. There's a few ways we could determine to enter the death state. One way is in our player script here. If we look, we've got a on damage taken function, and we could just do a check right after this to see if our health is 0 and then enter the death state. I don't like that because I want the player to get stunned for the brief second before he dies. And because our stun state is really short, I think that's okay. I think that's a good way to handle it. And so what we'll do, and in fact, I'm noticing one critical flaw that we didn't do with our death state, so we need to hook that up. But let me finish this explanation. In our take damage state, what we'll do here is we'll let it kind of play out. And then at this point where we're returning idle when the state has finished, we'll just build in a condition here to check his health. Okay, so let's get all this going. Let's go ahead and put our new death state script onto the state here in the player state machine. Let's go ahead and turn on the access by unique name. We do want to also come into our general player state script and add that reference to this state so that we can load it up from the other states as needed. Okay, so we've got our player death state in here. And now we're ready. So let's go back to this take damage state that we've built. I'm here in the process and we've got this little timer check. And so what I'll do is before we return to idle, we'll do a check. If player.hp is less than or equal to 0, it shouldn't be able to go below 0, but just in case, right? So if this is the case when our timer is up, let's return the death state. Otherwise, we can return the idle state. Okay, so that's all we're really going to do here to change this. And now if we run the project, we should enter the death state, and really things should basically be working. So there's 1 damage. There we go. So you can see he bounced back and then he died. If you don't like that, you can enter the state immediately. But I thought that that felt good. And you can see because of the way our state's working, let's go back and look at the script just to review this real quick. We're triggering the game over once that animation finishes. And so now here we are. Now we can decide what are we going to do, right? Go ahead and load my last game and we can keep playing. And it's just that simple. You can see this version of the player has his full health. We obviously don't have any other stats or anything special built in, but if he did, then hopefully those things should be set up as well by that player instantiate. All right, so I want to look at one other thing that's a defect or a bug that's kind of built into how we've built this that's not obvious yet. And, you know, we don't have any enemies walking around that could continue to bump into the player after he's dead. But I've gone ahead and built into my player HUD, and I need to maybe change what the text says. I'm going to say test spike. I'm just going to call it spike dummy. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to spawn a spike dummy at the player's location whenever we click this button so that we can see what happens. Let's go ahead and just jump over here. Okay, did damage, and he's dead. But watch. Oh no. Can I get to it? See, I can continue to make the player enter that state if I continue to damage him. We don't want the player to be able to take damage after he's died. So let's fix that bug. Hopefully there aren't any others that are hidden like this, but this will give you an idea how to fix them if there are. So looking at our player take damage script, really all we need to do, this is where we're running into the issue primarily, because it's telling the player to change the state every time it takes damage. But what we can do is we can just say if player.state, let's see, current state, I guess, right? Equals death, then we can return. Okay, that's going to prevent that. I want to look at my player script as well, just to make sure. On damage taken, that's fine. That's probably fine. But to be safe, we could add that same condition here. So we could say if current state equals, we would have to say something like, I don't know, current state.death. I think that's a way we could access it. Okay, or we could do a check where we could say is, you know, like player state death. That's probably a better way. Okay, so we could check the state here. I don't know if this one's as necessary, but because we're emitting this signal in the future, it could start producing bugs unexpectedly. So let's go ahead and run this game one more time and test that same scenario. So I should be able to just spawn these. And yeah, I'm not taking damage anymore, right? You can see every time I spawn one, it's doing that little hit dust because it's like hitting the player. That's okay. I think that's benign. You could also maybe try and get rid of that as well. Maybe disable the damage area on the player. There's other things you could do, but we've fixed that bug, so feeling good about that. All right. I guess that's the video. I feel like we spent most of the time debugging that issue I was having with the transition, but that's okay. It was worth it. So now we've not only been able to take damage from our last episode, but now the player can die. And this simple little system should give you all the tools that you need to build it into your own game, right? Because we can restart, we can go back to the title, you could add any other options you want here, or you could just make it automated, right? Maybe it's just you press a button and then it just loads your game. But I hope that you guys have learned a little bit new from this one and you're enjoying the project. From this point forward in this chapter, we're going to now start speeding up a little bit, and we're going to be focused more on the abilities. We've done ability related things, but next video is going to be the double jump. So one invitation to you is to try and build your own double jump. Now the double jump is kind of one of the weirder special abilities that we're going to build in, because I'm not going to build a separate state for it. We're just going to build it into our existing jump state. But there's lots of ways you could implement that, and it could be a second, a double jump state. And then from that point forward, we'll do our dash ability, and we'll have a ground slam ability, and then we'll do a morph roll ability, and it'll be really fun. We're going to build those out, and then by the end of the chapter, we'll be just implementing a way to acquire those abilities. But there's actually one thing I want to mention about that is, as you consider how to do double jump, or maybe you're looking forward to dash, maybe you've even already built those, but think, how are you going to enable and disable these abilities? And try and think of a way that you can implement that from the player standpoint, or what kind of system do you feel like you need in your game to make that happen? And then starting next video, I'll begin showing how I'm going to be implementing that, because we'll start adding the functionality to enable and disable an ability. All right, so thank you for watching. Please give me a comment and give me a like if you appreciate the video. And of course, if you're new, then I do hope you'll want to subscribe so you can see what's coming next. And as always, we'll see you next time.